Alright, here goes the very last section of Robert A. Johnson's book, Inner Work. And this is the aspect of active imagination, the different levels, and this is an explanation of experiencing the spiritual dimension, which is super interesting. And this one follows the first one, which is more like a psychedelic experience of imagination before your eyes or in your inner world, recognized as such rather than being an external experience. And this one is called The Spirit Man on Mount St. Helens. There you go. I want to recount for you a visionary experience that I passed through many years ago when I was a young man, long before I had any understanding of what these experiences are. This is the interior vision that demanded my attention, uninvited, one day as I was occupied with some mundane task long years after leaving the Northwest. One evening I made a campfire on the side of Mount St. Helens, where I had spent many happy summers in childhood before the volcano erupted. I squatted on my heels looking into my campfire at dusk. Even today I can remember the vivid colors of that evening and how they thrilled me. The orange of the campfire, the dark blue color of the evening sky, the purple-gray shadows on the mountains. I felt a great sense of joy, beauty, peacefulness, but also expectancy. A young man about my own age came walking up and stood just on the other side of the fire. I was on my heels by the fire, he was standing quietly, and we just looked at each other for a long time. I was still in a sort of ecstasy over the colors of the fire. Then, to my astonishment, the fire moved and transported itself down into the spirit lake, way at the bottom, and burned there as a tiny orange speck in the midst of that indigo blue water. Then the fire came back and burned before me. The young man took one step into the middle of the fire. He absorbed the fire into his bloodstream, so that he had fire circulating in his veins rather than blood. We stood there for some time, and I looking in awe at these events, and then he said, "Come, I'm going to show you how the world was made." We went off into space at an enormous distance, until the Earth and even the solar system had become only the tiniest speck in the distance. He showed me a spiral nebula spinning. This great mass of inert, formless matter, more energy than matter, slowly spun so slowly, as though there were all of eternity for it to spin through its evolutions. It spun slowly into coherence before my eyes, concentrating, reducing its volume, pulling itself together, until the huge nebula was formed into a diamond. The diamond was huge, many-faceted, with its own light source within, emanating light and color that I still remember vividly. As we watched, the young man directing my gaze, the diamond began to erupt out of its north pole and absorb that flow of energy back through its south pole, so that there was a circulation of light bubbling out of the top and reabsorbing through the bottom pole. It's describing the torus field, which is like the same shape that's present in an apple core, and you split it in half, and other different fruits and everything. The torus field is a model of life flow. So this is pretty cool. That intensified the color. That intensified the color and the faceting of light that emanated. Then it did what would be physically impossible. It split itself down the middle, and as the entire system continued to rotate like a planet, the two halves began to rotate in opposite directions while still touching each other, throwing off sparks of light and color. At that time, standing somewhere with this spirit man in distant reaches of space, I did something that it embarrasses me to remember. I turned and tugged at his sleeve and said irreverently, "This is fine, but what is it good for?" I was gazing at an event of the greatest importance, but being a practical American, I had to justify it by finding a way to use it or find something practical in it. Again I tugged at his sleeve and said, "What is it good for?" The spirit man looked at me in disgust. "It isn't good for anything. Just watch." That silenced me. We watched and I felt the colors, the light, the focusing of infinite energy and volume into diamond-like density and brightness were etched forever on my memory and had almost entered into the physical cells of my body. He took me back then, and I sat again on my heels before the campfire. He stood again in the fire. Then he stepped back and let the fire flow out of his arteries back into the little campfire on the ground. The fire went back down to the bottom of Spirit Lake and went on burning. Then the fire returned. The young man turned around without a word and walked back out into the twilight from where he had come. The vision ended, and I found myself back in my normal, mundane physical world. It is very difficult to know what to do with such a vision. I think the answer is inherent in the experience itself. Don't do anything with it. Don't try to convert it into something practical or something that makes sense to your ego mind. Just look, experience, and be there. Some part of one wants to ask, but shouldn't it change something, accomplish something, have some practical application? There is no need to justify visionary experiences or any practical level, on any practical level. But since all facets of life flow back to one reality, we learn ultimately that they have their practical and human effects. They do change us. They form our character in very deep places. They determine what kind of people we will be in 5, 10, or 20 years after the experience, when all of its power has worked its way back to the surface and into our lives. Then this magnificent power is transmuted into small things, day-to-day behavior, attitudes, the choices that we make, in the ordinariness of daily human life. Jung believed that God needs human agencies to assist in the incarnation of his creation. As Thomas Mann observes in Joseph and his Brothers, God needed the ladder in Jacob's dream as a way to come and go between heaven and earth. The vision of human beings makes such a ladder and transmit information into the collective unconscious of humanity. No practicality beyond this is required. I'll read that again with emphasis. No practicality beyond this is required. Because, my friends, that is the end of this book. Yay! And it's ending on such a powerful note there, too, with the experiences. I think no matter how big or how small, if you do the inner work and you meet some sort of profound lesson or come to some conclusion of some aspect of yourself that you didn't realize before, that there in itself is a great feat, is something worth celebrating, something worth just basking in for what it is without trying to add to it or put too much pressure on any expectation other than that you did it. You recognized a part of yourself that you didn't realize that you were. You've grown in your consciousness. You've expanded your knowledge of self, and with that, you've become more of a human being. And I think that's kind of the purpose of this life experience, is to know that although everything has been conditioned in us to pick a path and pick a way and pick a personality and some aspect or way of being, that's truly not going to be the life most fulfilling, because you're so much more vast than that. And it helps us to serve the conventional paradigm, to pick a descriptor of self and to live out as that. But where we're going, we will discover that every single day and every single moment can be different just by your choice to do something different. Like, I could start speaking a different language right here, you know, and I could just choose to go off and live in another country for a year and just immerse myself and speak those languages and learn that culture and just become that version of myself, because it's a potentiality, it's a possibility, and it's actually something I'm really considering doing, just taking off. But, you know, just if you get nothing more from it than that, is just to be expanded. Live in your most expanded version of yourself, not cutting off the possibilities of anything. And if you don't feel the desire to live it outright, you can at least go within and recognize the part of yourself that does want to explore it, whether you are going to admit it or not. Because if there's some sort of a battle with yourself, or you feel irritation at somebody who's exploring or living some part of their life that you're kind of like, you set up a judgment or a prejudice against, it may be just that you don't forgive yourself for ever, you know, allowing yourself to go there. So at least go there within your inner world by doing the inner work. And that is all that I have. Thank you again so much for watching this and for reading this book with me. And I truly hope that it has been beneficial for you as it has for me. And I think that I'm going to just end it right here and see what's next to read. So